Thank you so much for coming on a snowy night. I know traffic was a little bit challenging. Appreciate you all in coming here. And please join me in thanking the museum for an absolutely beautiful welcome to us all. My name is Leanne Finney, and I am pleased to welcome you on behalf of Barrier Free Manitoba. For those for which a physical description would be helpful, I'm a middle-aged white woman with silvery blonde, long, straight hair and glasses, and I'm dressed in black pants and a blue cardigan jacket over top of a black top. Before we begin today, I want to acknowledge the land upon which we're meeting on Treaty 1 territory, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, Dene, and the homeland of the Métis people. I also further want to acknowledge that most of us, most Manitobans, access drinking water from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation at a time when many Indigenous communities nationwide continue to lack a clean source of water. As I acknowledge these facts, I recognize the harms and mistakes of the past, and I remind myself that words are easy, but action is what is needed. And we had a session this afternoon, and David eloquently reminded us that to heck with awareness, what we need is action. And so we really must move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities and people in that spirit of reconciliation and collaboration to create access and inclusion for all people. Barrier Free Manitoba, for those that aren't familiar with the organization, is a nonpartisan, nonprofit, cross-disability initiative that was originally formed back in 2008. Barrier Free's main objective was first to achieve the passing of strong accessibility legislation, and then to continue to press for the robust and effective implementation of its regulations. What originally was thought to be an initiative that might take a few years has now spanned 15 years and several iterations of people working towards this goal, many of whom are still in the room of past iterations. Alas, there remains a lot to do. The current steering committee refers to itself as BFM 5.0. And we are beyond excited to welcome today's speaker. Often in our work, we have looked to Ontario to learn from, given that they were the first province to pass accessibility legislation and are several years ahead of Manitoba in their journey towards implementation. One of the people that we often look to learn from is our speaker tonight. David Lepofsky has been the passion, the voice of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act, or the AODA Alliance, for years, and his depth of knowledge and experience seems to know no bounds, as does his generosity in coming to Winnipeg in the middle of winter to share some of his insights with us tonight. By way of a small snippet of some of David's accomplishments and experience, he holds a Bachelor of Law from Osgoode Hall Law School and a Master's from Harvard Law School. He has been a member of the Ontario Bar since 1981 and an adjunct faculty member at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law. He is currently a visiting research professor of disability rights in the Faculty of Law at Western University. He's lectured widely on various aspects of constitutional and administrative law, human rights and disability rights, and other topics across Canada and internationally. He received the Order of Canada, the Order of Ontario, a variety of honorary doctorates, and a number of awards for his tireless advocacy for the rights of people with disabilities. Please help me welcome David Lepofsky.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I grew up in Toronto, so my understanding is that Western Canada means like Mississauga and beyond. And when I talk to anybody in Toronto about I'm coming to Winnipeg on the 7th of January, even I could hear eyes rolling because it's really cold. But you know what? I've not met a warmer bunch of people in my life. I have been just so delighted by all of the wonderful people I've gotten to spend time with, my old friends, like Melissa Graham and Yvonne Peters, and of course the incomparable and unstoppable Patrick Faulkner, and my new friends who are part of BFM 5.0. Who will remain on as 6.0 and 7.0 because we got an injunction prohibiting them from leaving. So where are we at? Well, you folks here and we back in Manitoba, across Canada and frankly around the world, we live in a world which is designed and operated top to bottom on a fundamentally ridiculous basis. It is overwhelmingly designed and operated as if it is primarily or exclusively for people without disabilities. The public transit we ride, the buildings we go into, the jobs that we seek, and the workplaces where we do them, the goods that we buy and the stores where we buy them, even the laws that we operate under and the courts that administer them are all designed and operated on the implicit fundamental starting point that they are for people without disabilities. Now, that's not to say there's nothing out there for us, but what there is typically an afterthought. Now, I don't for a moment suggest, and none of you would think that there's a conspiracy out there that someone sat down rubbing their hands with glee and said, let's design the world this way. Of course not. But the fact of the matter is, had there been a conspiracy against us, the world would not look any different than it does. So who cares if there's no intent underlying it? Oh, we didn't think of you, is supposed to be the defense. No, it isn't. It's the offense. It's what's wrong. Now, who suffers from this? How small is the minority that suffers from this? Over 6 million Canadians? Upwards of 1 billion people around the world? Those numbers are huge. But those numbers, even though they're huge, grossly understate the real numbers. That's just people who have their disability already. It doesn't include people near and dear to them, their kids, their parents, their spouses, their siblings who have a disability. And it doesn't include everybody else who's bound to get their disability as they get older. We are the weirdest minority of all because we are the minority of everyone. So add it up. We live in a world that is fundamentally designed in a way that ultimately hurts the minority of everyone. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So what do we do about it? Well, back in the 70s, a whole lot of people among people with disabilities thought, you know what, people don't mean it. But the biggest problem we face, they think, is our disability. Oh, David, you're blind. That must be horrible. And it was a revelation to a young, late teens David Lepofsky when he heard others saying, no, the biggest problem we face is not our disability. It's just like part of us. The biggest problem we face is the attitudes of others. That was like revolutionary in the 70s. The problem is not our condition, it's your attitudes, we said. And that was revolutionary. But it also steered us into a chain of reasoning that didn't work. Because the chain of reasoning it steered us into was, okay, the biggest problem is the attitudes of others. Let's educate them. Let's raise awareness. And a lot of people went to town doing awareness raising. I was one of them. And we gave speeches and people laughed at our jokes and they said we were inspiring. And so on. But guess what? Maybe some awareness got raised, but practices didn't change. Yeah, some people did, but not enough. Barriers remained, new ones popped up. It didn't work. And there's a reason it didn't work, because you can't get to everybody. And you get to an audience, you talk to people, okay, they like it, they go back to their offices, then they're busy. Or they send a memo saying we should change our practice, and the memo gets lost, or nobody follows it, or they're not in a position of authority. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. It'll change some practices, but not enough. So this led a bunch of people, I was one of them, to start thinking, well, there ought to be a law. Hey, I was in law school in 1976, so it kind of seemed sensible, like reading all these other laws. Why don't we make it illegal to discriminate because of disability? So a number of people here and in different parts of the country fought to get disability added into the law that banned discrimination, the Human Rights Code. And we also fought to get disability included in the Charter of Rights 42 years ago. And we won those battles, and it was pretty exciting. It was now illegal to discriminate against people because of their disability. This was a seismic change in Canadian law from perspective of disability rights, but after a few years, there was a problem. Didn't work. Not because those laws were too weak. They weren't. Not because the courts interpreted the laws too narrowly. They didn't. But because of two inherent problems with those laws. First, they require us to fight barriers one at a time. And frankly, life's too short. I've done it. A number of you have done it. Take on an organization and a barrier. I fought to force the Toronto Transit Commission to audibly announce subway stops so we blind people could know where the heck we are, and everybody else on the subway who can't see through the window. And won, and then I had to fight again to force the Toronto Transit Commission to announce all bus stops. Took years. TTC, I filed a Freedom of Information request, spent $450,000 on lawyers opposing me. And then they say, oh, we can't afford accessibility. We're short on money. Yeah, look how you spent it. But the first problem is people with disabilities, often unemployed, often living in poverty, are not in a position, underserved by the legal profession, are not in a position to lawyer up and fight every single barrier they face, one organization at a time. We can't be full-time accessibility cops. And the second problem is, with those laws, is even if an organization wants to do the right thing, they want to obey the law, they pick up the Human Rights Code, they pick up the Charter of Rights, they read them from beginning to end, and they don't know how to set up their website, how wide to make the aisles of their store, or how high to put the shelves. They don't know what counter height they should achieve, or that they should even think about the height of their counter. where they serve the public. These laws, while fundamental to us, don't give obligated organizations clear directions on what they need to do and when they need to do it. If they did, then we'd have a better chance that organizations would do it. So this led in the early 90s for a small group of people in Toronto, 20 of us, to end up in a meeting room at Queen's Park at the Ontario Legislature one day, 29th of November, 30 years ago this year, 1994, with a vision that we needed something new. We needed a better law, not to replace the Charter and the Human Rights Code, but to make them work so that people with disabilities didn't have to privately become accessibility cops suing one barrier at a time, and so that obligated organizations could know what they got to do without having to hire consultants and lawyers and try to read a statute that just says, don't discriminate. Try to interpret that statute. And that's what led to the fight for the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. We were inspired by the Americans with Disabilities Act, but we tried to come up with a made in Canada variation on it. And I had the privilege from 94 to 2005 to lead the fight that led to the enactment of that legislation. And it was a grassroots fight. If you go to a provincial legislature or federal parliament, most of the laws that get passed there, the vast majority of them are, number one, boring as hell. And number two, they don't come from the people. They come from the bureaucrats or from political parties' platforms, top down. And that's fine. But the AODA was different because it came from the people. It came from people with disabilities from one end of Ontario to the other, who fought for it, not just for a law, but for a law that included the things they wanted. And that grassroots feeling equally took root here in Manitoba. In 2008, small group of folks formed Barrier Free Manitoba, not because of anybody in Ontario giving them tips or whatever. They just came up with it themselves and fought for and built the movement that brought on board others within the disability community, that succeeded in, well, it took us 10 years in Ontario, it succeeded in 7 years, or pardon me, in 5 years in getting the AMA passed, which was a fabulous accomplishment. And like the AODA, the AMA passed unanimously. And that is a huge accomplishment. With all parties voting for it, there's less likelihood that any party would turn around and try to repeal it. And we know about that from Ontario because in 1990, Ontario elected a new Democratic government that then passed an Employment Equity Act. And in 1995, Ontario elected a Conservative government that campaigned to repeal it and did what they promised. And employment equity legislation's been dead ever since. We learned the lesson that it was really important to make sure it passed unanimously. So, how's it going? Well, the good news is you have a lot of good news in Manitoba, in my view. You've got a lot of good news. You've got one piece of bad news, but it's followed by a lot of good news. The bad news you got is that over 10 years after the AMA was passed, you have not made the progress towards an accessible province that the legislature unanimously promised you back in 2013. The legislation promised substantial progress towards an accessible province by 2023. And you in your own lives know that you didn't get there. But more important, or I should say as important, an independent review conducted by someone handpicked by the previous government, concluded exactly that there has not been substantial progress. Now that sounds like bad news, but I'm going to give you a bunch of good news. And I'm going to suggest to you ways to capitalize on the good news. In my experience, having done this disability advocacy as a volunteer over 4 decades on and off, there are lots of times when you could feel frustrated, of course. There are lots of times when it could seem like the battle's not only uphill, but it's vertical. But there are times, a few discrete times that come along when there's a window of opportunity. Now, we don't wait for those windows of opportunity, and we keep campaigning no matter what. But when those windows of opportunity open, even a sliver, our job is to grab that window and shove it open as far as possible and push through and try to make progress. And you are at one of those windows right now. We had a window of opportunity back in 1980 when Pierre Trudeau proposed a Charter of Rights. It included equality rights, but not disability equality. But we had the opportunity to fight to get disability added. And through the efforts of the likes of my friend Yvonne Peters, Yvonne, I'm not sure if you're here tonight, and me and others, all working without an internet to tell us who's doing what or if anyone's doing anything, we succeeded. More about that when I wrap up. We had a window of opportunity in Ontario in 2003. We're nonpartisan, as are you, but in 2003, when after a conservative government promised a Disabilities Act, delivered a really, really weak one, a new government was elected under a premier named Dalton McGuinty, who promised a stronger one. We had a window of opportunity there, and we jumped on it. There was a window of opportunity in 2015 when another Trudeau got elected on a promise federally to enact an Accessible Canada Act, and people with disabilities from various parts of the country fought, and we won that. Now, all could have been better, but those were windows of opportunity when they opened that people with disabilities jumped on. You've got one now. Let me describe it to you. Why I see this as such a tremendous sweet spot in the timeline. First, you got an Accessible Manitoba Accessible Manitoba's Act that's got the key bones in it. It's got the key ingredients. Yeah, if I was writing it today, I would include other things, but I wouldn't touch it. Just leave it as is. It's got the components you need, and all parties supported it. So you could treat it as sacrosanct. Second, you've got a new government. And at the start of any new government, when an older government's defeated, is a window of a couple of years when they can decide to really dig in and do something new and something different. Third, all the actions you need the government to take can be done by the government without needing to set one foot in the legislature to get one word of legislation passed. It's already in the AMA. So the government can't say, well, we'd like to do something, but we don't have the statutory power to do it. They do. You've got next, number 4, you have an excellent independent review report prepared by Sarah Luchtig, which really gives the roadmap. I could quibble with a little thing here, a little thing there, nothing that matters. It is excellent. It's worth looking at and deciding telling the government which items are priorities. I'm going to give you some suggestions in a minute. But you've got the roadmap forward. Next, that report tells the government, the public, and you that there is clear public support for doing accessibility. So this isn't politically controversial. Believe me, there are issues where there are other sides that are loudly articulated that you got to fight against. This isn't one of them. So you got all of these things. And let me crown it off by saying you got Barrier-Free Manitoba. And Barrier-Free Manitoba is a fantastic bunch of folks. It's, in fact, the model of the organization is, to me, the right one for this issue. There are different models of organizations for different kinds of issues. This has worked for this issue. Barrier-Free Manitoba 1.0 pulled together to fight for the legislation. They did their job, and they did it well, and then they passed the torch to a successive generation of leaders. And that is a healthy process. And the new generation, pretty much all of whom I'm meeting for the first time, are a really good, talented, dedicated, and dare I say it, really nice bunch of folks, which is all you could ever ask for. They take their job seriously. They don't take themselves that seriously. And that's fantastic, because that's what really makes things, and they're in it for one thing only, and that's the success of the cause. So, what do you do? The big question is, what do you do next? And I want to spend a few minutes on that. But before I do, I want to pause for a commercial break. Would you like to learn more about how to be an activist? Are you eager to do something but don't know what to do? A pad is coming around. Give your email address. If you need help, Jennifer has got the pad. I really feel like I'm on Let's Make a Deal or something. And hey, Monty Hall comes from Winnipeg. I got it. This is so cool. I wonder, maybe he grew up in this, where this building is. Anyway, what we'd love you to do is to sign up to get email updates from either, both of two organizations. One is Barrier-Free Manitoba. If you're not on their email list, get on it. Their updates are excellent. And as well, we'll put you on the email list for the AODA Alliance. If you're on one but not the other, put your name on the list anyway. Just print your email address. We're not going to give you out to anybody else. We won't ask for money and all that stuff. But you can learn from them, from both organizations, action tips and strategies. Some of the stuff from Ontario may be irrelevant. Some of it may give you some good ideas. And heck, read the headline. You're not interested? Hit delete. Back to our regularly scheduled program. So what are we going to do? Well, I'd like to suggest, and I talked to the Barrier-Free Manitoba leadership and suggested this today, and they're cool with me offering you this as some priorities, because with a new government and with a report like Sarah's excellent report, you want to come forward with a short list of here's what to do. And I'd like to suggest what it is. First, they've passed 4 accessibility standards: customer service, employment, information and communication, and transportation. More about them in a minute. But the thing is, you need more. And I want to suggest what your priorities should be. Number 1, you need one that covers the entire built environment. That means inside and outside buildings. Word is that the government is proposing or about to enact one that only deals with the built environment outside buildings. And I have a very simple answer. People with disabilities in Winnipeg and in Manitoba in January probably want to be inside a building. And they deserve to be able to get in there and get around too. All in favor? Any objections? Does the motion carry? I mean, come on. Leave it to the building code, a failed statute that never succeeded in ensuring accessible buildings? and that doesn't cover new existing buildings that are not being renovated. That is a formula for failure. Well, let's harmonize it with the federal building code. That's because the federal government has such a better record on achieving accessibility. Excuse me? We need a built environment accessibility standard that works together with the building code, but that actually does address all built environment barriers. Can I give you an example of stupid? I'm staying at a hotel. I won't mention any names because we're, in a public event. The initials are Fairmount, Winnipeg. And I'm a blind guy. I check in, and there's Braille on the elevators. That's fantastic. There's Braille on the room numbers. I'm sure because it used to be a Weston part of an American chain, thanks to the Americans with Disabilities Act. I suspect that's why it's there. But when I press the button for my floor, I got no way of knowing I'm on my floor. The elevator doesn't speak the floors. And there is a beep each time it goes up, but you try counting 20 down from floor 21 to 6, and God forbid anybody gets on the elevator and talks. I just don't have enough toes, and I can't count them that fast. Now, why is it that we aren't requiring elevators in a public facility like a, hotel to tell us what floor we're on? It's a standard accommodation, which the building code doesn't cover, and an AMA built environment accessibility standard that only deals with the outdoors won't help. I told you it was stupid. It's really stupid. I mean, these are, you could just go on and on. Let me take a minute to show you an outdoor event or an outdoor problem we've got in Toronto that I made a video about. Yeah, they need a blind guy to make videos to raise these issues. I did have a sighted student. Can we, this runs 7 minutes. I released this video a month and a half ago, and it's gotten a whole bunch of media attention. Can we roll the video?
My name is David Lepofsky. I am blind. I live in Toronto, Canada. I'm a retired lawyer and a volunteer disability rights advocate. I'm the chair of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act Alliance. I'm also the visiting research professor of disability rights at the University of Western Ontario's Faculty of Law. Let me show you a dangerous new disability barrier that the City of Toronto has recently created in the heart of busy Midtown Toronto using public money. Here is a new sidewalk on the north side of Eglinton Avenue running east from the Eglinton and Avenue Road intersection. I have safely and independently walked alone on this sidewalk many times using my white cane before the City of Toronto made a very dangerous change to it. The city put a new bike path on the sidewalk right alongside the road. As I walk on the sidewalk, I have no way of knowing that there's a bike path here. Even if you told me that there's a bike path on the sidewalk, I can't tell where it is, so I can avoid walking in the bike path. This is the first time I've encountered this ridiculous sidewalk design. I have walked alone independently and safely on countless sidewalks. I am trained to use my cane systematically to tap the ground in front of me where I'm going to step. My cane is an extension of my index finger. It points at the ground in front of me. I tap the tip of my cane back and forth in front of each foot, or I sweep my cane on the sidewalk back and forth in front of each foot. Before I step, the cane tells me if there is an obstacle. Here I am walking on a typical sidewalk. I use my cane to follow the sidewalk edge, either this edge on my left side, which has a step down to the road, or the edge on my right, which has grass along the edge. We call this shorelining. On this typical sidewalk, it is easy to shoreline. I can even switch from using one shoreline to the other. Here, I've switched to a more cluttered sidewalk. It is harder to shoreline along a cluttered sidewalk, like this one on the north side of Eglinton West, near the corner of Headington. It is easy to walk east on the north side of Eglinton, approaching Avenue Road, shorelining along the edge of the sidewalk to my right, where it steps down to the road. There is a bike path to my right, down at street level. It poses no danger to me. I know I am safe up on the sidewalk. But once I cross Avenue Road and walk east on the north side of Eglinton, the disaster begins. On this new sidewalk, the city built this new bike path up on the sidewalk alongside the road. There is no clear, obvious cane detectable barrier between the bike path and the sidewalk's pedestrian area. When I sweep my cane back and forth in front of me, nothing tells me there's a bike path here. I only know there's a bike path here because a sighted friend told me. I'm walking east, shorelining along the edge of the sidewalk to my right. The city can't claim that there is a clear and obvious tactile difference between the bike path and the rest of the sidewalk. That would be dead wrong. Toronto sidewalks have notoriously inconsistent tactile textures from 1 meter to the next. It would be foolish for a blind person to rely on any of that. This is very dangerous for a blind person using a white cane or a guide dog. The dog won't know that this is a dangerous bike path. If I leave this Eglinton Avenue pizza joint and walk across the sidewalk to the curbside to wait for an Uber, I'm a sitting duck as I cross the bike path. As a lifelong Toronto resident, this is infuriating. It feels as if my city has posted a sign here saying blind people are not welcome. It's a cruel slap in the face in a city and province that say they're committed to becoming accessible to people with disabilities. This design endangers other pedestrians. If a cyclist rides towards me when I'm walking on the bike path, they may have to swerve into the pedestrian area to avoid hitting me. This design endangers sighted pedestrians who are looking down at their phone texting and may unintentionally stray into the bike path. This design endangers little kids who might not expect bikes to be racing at them somewhere in the midst of a sidewalk. This design endangers cyclists. If I unknowingly walk close to the bike path, my cane could get caught in their spokes. Every few meters, there is a tree in the middle of the sidewalk between the bike path and the pedestrian area. Trees in the middle of the sidewalk are more clutter that makes it harder to navigate. It certainly doesn't warn me that there's a bike path here. Who designed this? Who approved this? If they had bothered to think about it, it would be instantly obvious that this is dangerous for people with disabilities like me. Not only is this bike path dangerous, it is illegal. It violates the right to equality for people with disabilities in the Charter of Rights, the Ontario Human Rights Code, and the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. It is illegal to create new accessibility barriers like this. This danger would get even worse if the City of Toronto, God forbid, legalized those dangerous electric scooters. A few city council members want to allow them on bike paths. Here, that would be legalizing e-scooters on this sidewalk. E-scooters are a silent menace, ridden by uninsured, unlicensed, untrained joyriders. Many disability organizations want e-scooters banned in all public areas, including, of course, sidewalks. Here's a screenshot of a CBC News report about an innocent pedestrian on a Toronto sidewalk who was hit by an illegally ridden e-scooter and knocked unconscious. Bike paths are a great thing. We need more of them. Toronto could have easily saved public money and a lot of grief if they had designed this bike path sensibly. This is not rocket science. Toronto must immediately remove the bike path from this sidewalk and from any other sidewalks. No city should ever build a bike path in the midst of a sidewalk. Any new bike path should be built at road level, not at sidewalk level, clearly divided from the sidewalks. Build a small barrier between the bike path and car traffic. It is no solution to build a bike path in the midst of a sidewalk and put some kind of guidance tiles or bumps or other tactile markers in the sidewalk. It won't work. Many blind people won't know they're there or won't know what they mean. Even if they installed some sort of tactile line, I won't know which side of the line is the safe side. It would be a waste of money. The city should make public who approved this dangerous design. They should never again design public infrastructure. Toronto's mayor and infrastructure committee should join me at this sidewalk. Walk in my shoes. Tell me how I'm supposed to know where it is safe to walk on this sidewalk. The Ontario government must also step up to the plate. We need a new provincial regulation setting safe bike path accessibility standards so that this never happens again. The Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act requires the province to lead Ontario to become accessible to people with disabilities by 2025 by enacting and enforcing standards like that. Creating new barriers like this wastes public money. It wastes public money if each city has to reinvent the accessibility wheel. People with disabilities should not be treated as second-class citizens. We deserve better.
Learn more at www.aodaalliance.org and on Twitter at AODA Alliance. Response to the video: overwhelming support from members of the public, including strangers walking up to me on the street. Ample media coverage, 3 networks within 2 days. And the City of Toronto saying they don't see anything wrong. Which is why we need strong accessibility standards. I was talking before this about ensuring an effective built environment standard, both inside and, as the video shows, outside of buildings. But you need 3 others, and the government needs to commit. We want the government now to commit to develop them. One is in the area of education for students with disabilities, both in kindergarten to grade 12 schools and in post-secondary education, college, university, and job training programs. Our education system, sadly, is built on that same ridiculous premise I talked about at the start of my talk, principally to serve students without disabilities. What students with disabilities get is some inadequate second thought called special education, which I describe as like a shoehorn trying to shove your foot into a shoe that was never designed for your foot. You can't get a good job without a good education. Students with disabilities should not face the barriers they face. I believe our educators want to be able to teach all kids, but they're handcuffed by an education system full of barriers. Second, you need a new healthcare accessibility standard because patients with disabilities face too many barriers in the healthcare system, as we learned when it got even worse during the COVID pandemic. Third, we need a residential housing accessibility standard to address the accessible housing crisis facing people with disabilities who try to find a home, something which is going to get only worse as our population ages. Now, to make life easier here, Manitoba has 2 advantages. One is that its existing accessibility standards, at least the first 3, are stronger than Ontario's. They need to be fixed. More on that in a minute. But you've got a good starting point. You've got a better starting point than we have in Ontario. As well, when it comes to developing a healthcare accessibility standard and an education accessibility standard, tons of work have already been done that can be handed over to Manitoba on a silver platter. The Ontario government, after years of advocacy by us, agreed to develop an education accessibility standard and a healthcare accessibility standard. They appointed standards development committees to deal with each. For healthcare, there was one. For education, there were 2. One to deal with K-12 education, I was on it, and one to deal with post-secondary education. And the good news is they all rendered detailed reports. I can tell you the K-12 report in which I was actively involved was the most thorough review of our K-12 school system in Ontario and its treatment of students with disabilities that has taken place in my lifetime. And it was the result of a consensus view, equal members from the disability community and educators. And when we sent our draft recommendations out to the public for feedback, we got overwhelming support from both the disability community, parents of kids with disabilities, and educators. So when you look at our report, you've got a combination of overwhelming support from the community and a comprehensive review, first time in our lifetimes. So what Manitoba could do with both of these areas, healthcare and education, is to appoint a standards development committee for each, but hand them the Ontario work product and say, don't reinvent the wheel, start with this. If you don't agree with some of it, tell us. If you got stuff to mention that suggests that that they left out, add it in, but you don't have to start from scratch. We spent 4 years on ours. That means you could be 4 years ahead of the game. So those are the new standards you need. The second thing I recommend for Manitoba is you need to strengthen the existing ones. And you need to strengthen them in two ways. First, the standards that have been passed, I didn't get the time to get all the way through the transportation one, but for the first three, customer service, employment, and information and communication, don't actually do what an accessibility standard's supposed to do. They say to organizations that provide employment or information communication or customer service that they should address barriers, but they don't tell them systematically all the barriers they should address. They don't tell them specifically what to do. So for example, in the case of employment, they talk a lot about the duty to accommodate workers with disabilities, employees with disabilities, and that's great. That's required by the Human Rights Code. But they leave the workplace as is. Let the employer keep all the existing barriers, create new ones, no problem. But in the meantime, just accommodate workers with disabilities to the point of undue hardship. Well, the workplace of 5 years from now could be a barrier-free workplace, but only if the employer starts working on that right now. And they need the standard to tell them what they need to do, not some just generally saying, please remove and prevent barriers, without telling them specifically which ones to remove and prevent. So these standards need to fill in details that are missing. But the other thing that needs to be fixed in these standards is what they say about the duty to accommodate people with disabilities under the Human Rights Code is, I regret, wrong. It understates the obligation of those who provide goods, services, and employment. Their duty is to accommodate the needs of people with disabilities, except where the organization can itself prove that it is impossible to do anything more without undue hardship. That's the obligation, okay? There's a right to be accommodated, except if the organization can prove either that you don't need the accommodation or that to do anything more to accommodate you would cause them undue hardship. What the standards say in a number of places that you have to do something if technically feasible or if readily achievable. That dilutes and reduces the obligation, and it reduces the rights of people with disabilities. Moreover, as written, it does not make it clear that the duty is to accommodate except where the organization can prove undue hardship. The burden is on the organization to prove undue hardship. It is presumed that any hardship either doesn't exist or is due unless they can prove otherwise. And it's harmful to people with disabilities for an accessibility standard to tell employers or service providers something which is below what their real duty is. And it's not fair to them. Because if those organizations just read the standard, but don't go running off to read the Human Rights Code and compare the two, they may think that the standard tells them all they got to do. That hurts us. It's got to get fixed. So that's the second thing. The first thing is the government should start working on new standards. The second is they should fix the old ones to make them better. And the third thing the government needs to do is to do effective enforcement. And the Sarah Lugtig report talks a lot about it, makes a number of good ideas, and the community can suggest others, and I'd be happy to share some more too. So what do you do out there? This all sounds great. This is all fine. Nod my head. I think it's great. What the heck do you do about it? Well, let me tell you what to do about it. The good news is that everybody in this room can do something about it. First thing is sign up for that list. Make sure you get on Barrier Free Manitoba's email list because they are going to be sending you action tips. Advocacy in 2024 is not typically about going to meetings and eating stale donuts and drinking crappy coffee in some church basement like it used to be. It's getting that email, reading the action tip, picking up your phone, or firing off an email and getting into action. Your letters to the editor, your guest columns in the newspaper, your email to members of your legislature, your phone call to members of your legislature, your visits to members of the legislature, that's what's going to make the difference. It is a new government, but they need to hear from you. If everybody in this room phoned and asked for a meeting with their MLA tomorrow for the next constituency day to walk in and say, what are you going to do to strengthen the implementation of the AMA? That could make a huge difference. That could make a huge difference. So you've got, and don't for a moment think that you need, thousands of people out protesting to get action. It wasn't thousands of people protesting that got the AMA passed. It was people you who are here or people like you who were here who did it. So let me conclude and then invite questions. And I want to conclude with two things. One, another shameless plug, and then two, just a little message of hope. The shameless plug is, I mentioned before that that I was one of the people involved in fighting to get disability into the charter 42 years ago. It was a group effort by a lot of people, most of which were not in touch with each other. I was just one of them. But I decided to write the story out. And I've written kind of a memoir of the battle. It's going to be published sometime this year. I'm just waiting to hear back from the publisher. And the good news is it's really expensive. It costs nothing. It's going to be posted online as a free download at the Faculty of Law Journal at the University of Windsor in Ontario. I will let Barrier Free Manitoba know when it's available. One click and you can read it. My intention in writing it is for this generation and the next generation of disability rights advocates to know how the fight was fought when there was no social media, to know what arguments we tried that were really good, to know what arguments we tried that were remarkably stupid, to see what kind of arguments were made in response to us, and to learn how you might fight the battle differently. And if you think the challenge you face today in moving forward on these issues may be uphill, the title of the memoir tells you what it was like back then, because I call it Swimming Up Niagara Falls. That's what it felt like, but guess what? We got there, and so can you. So let me conclude, before I take questions, by thanking you all for coming and for honoring me with the opportunity to speak with you. Thank you in advance for your willingness to work with and support the efforts of Barrier Free Manitoba. And let me just tell you this. You might think to be an effective advocate, you got to be some loudmouth, balding, blind lawyer who won't shut up. But the fact is, you're all already proven superb advocates without being loudmouth, bald, blind, or having the disability of a law degree. That was a joke. The fact of the matter is, you were all the absolute proven best advocates before you even knew it, because the best advocate follows the 3 laws of advocacy, and the best practitioner of them is a newborn baby, which you all were. A newborn baby? Why that? Well, because picture the newborn baby using the 3 rules of advocacy that I commend upon you. Number 1, know what it is that you want to get. That baby sure does. Number 2, make your message loud, clear, and simple. Yeah, the baby does that. And finally, do not stop till you get what you're after. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to your questions.